And during those times when we were in the shutdown mode due to COVID, the Benicia Herald credits those writers in large part with keeping the newspaper alive, because we were able to speak and talk to each other through that medium. So it is a grand gathering today. We will be going through the readings from this book that are kind of emblematic of what we all went through during those early days of COVID. The column in the newspaper that turned into the book was conceived as a place where we could voice and hear our individual concerns and worries and coping mechanisms as we were sheltering in place. It lasted a lot longer than we thought it was going to. And during that time, so many other issues arose and confronted us, and we were at a point where everything was very, very significant, very dramatic. And it left us all wondering, where do we go from here? It left us all asking the question, are we looking so much to return to normalcy? What was normal? Is it desirable? Or are we looking to have learned from this terrible experience? Are we looking to have learned from the power of community to sustain us all, even through times of loss, heartache, injustice, economic duress, climate crisis, and threats to democracy? So just a moment to look. I wanted to show you the cover of the book, and there are copies there for sale if you don't have one. The cover art was chosen carefully. This is Lady Liberty, masked. And she is masked because of COVID. She is also masked because of the kinds of threats to the environment that are choking the life out of us. And we also are seeing the terrible irony of George Floyd being unable to breathe, choked to death by forces that were bigger than him. So it's all there in the covers. And I want you to turn to your program for a moment, just because there are a couple of changes in the program. A couple of our readers are ill, but others will be covering for them, so that you will find Beth Grimm's reading will be delivered by Becky Bishop-White, and that Mary Eichbauer's reading I will be reading. And then there is one change in the order of our presentations from what you have on the printed program. After the April 8th journal entry, we'll go to April 24th with Brandon Greene's Living With, Living Without. So that's just a change in the order. And you will probably want to be following the program as we go through, because we're not going to have introductions of the readers before they read. We really want this to be what it turned out to be, not a collection of everybody's best poem on whatever the topic was. It's not that kind of collection or anthology. When we put it all together, we realized it was our journal, our community's journal, of the life and times we were all going through here. So journal readings are the way we describe it. So I have talked a bit about the background of the book, I want to call on Elizabeth Patterson, who was mayor of Benicia during 2020. And just to get some of your comments about how this all fits into the context of this community.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary Susan. That's really dangerous to say some of your comments. Roger is probably crossing his fingers right now that I won't take up more than half an hour.
Go for it, Elizabeth.
So, and another irrelevant point is that my jacket is the result of seeing zebras in Africa a few years ago. And I thought they were the most magnificent sight I had seen. And they're much better out in the savannah than they are in the zoos. And I just loved the pattern. So I came back full of enthusiasm. And I was telling my daughter that I think I'll have everything in stripes. And she says, Mom, people in jail wear stripes. And so when I saw this online, I thought, that's it. I can get close enough to a zebra without looking like I'm in jail. I did not bring that sense of humor to what was going on in 2020. Our last in-person meeting on the council was in March. And quite frankly, the reason we didn't meet in person is because of the city attorney, who is about 30 years younger than I am, and he did not want to be in the council chambers. And I was kind of, going to forge ahead, and because after all, this was something that we all meet a crisis, and we will pursue that, persevere. And so that was our last meeting. And indeed, when I left office at the end of 2020, we never met again. And that has different context to it. While we were, so there was this unbelievable transition from meeting in council chambers and dealing with policies for guiding the city and land use planning and other operations. We just had to focus on how do you maintain a city? How do you maintain your staff and its staff safety? And it was all new. And I was sort of glued to the webinar because there was a lot of help online from the League of Cities, from Institute of Local Government, and from a variety of sources, and they really rose to the occasion really rapidly. So a lot of the times I spent hours and hours and hours picking up on bits of information and would share it with staff, but at the end, it was staff that was running the city, as they should. They were protecting the city, they were protecting staff, because if you had a bunch of people get sick in public works, who was going to maintain the water delivery and water quality? It was really significant things like that. And so there's this other world. And then came the sections in the newspaper. And my touch with reality was being able to read those, because it was a reflection of being reflective. It was a reflection of how people were feeling about these very uncertain waters that we were in. And it was kind of some hopeful, some expressing the same fear that I had. After all, I was an older adult, and there was a lot of talk about what the price was being paid by older adults. And so it was being able to connect with everyday people who were writing about this. And Johanna's piece, I almost was going to read it, but you're here, and so I'll let you read. It was very touching to me. And so that was what it meant for that whole year, going through those months. And I reread this not from cover to cover, but I reread this from time to time, particularly when Mary Susan asked me to speak. And I keep finding nuggets. I keep finding things that I hadn't thought about before or hadn't reflected on before. And so it's extremely valuable, and I encourage you to keep it out, don't put it away, and refer back to it from time to time. One piece in here, and can I read a piece? She says, hesitantly. So, let's see if I have it. So because I'm in government, and because I pay a whole lot of attention to the politics, which were extremely disappointing And as things turned out, it was a public health issue that was being turned into a monstrosity of what public health is all about. And I'm sorry if I offend anybody that has a different opinion. That's my opinion, and I really terribly regret what happened with this. I'm a child of polio, right? When I was a child, I was perhaps subject to getting polio. My mother worked on helping people on iron lungs. That was her job. And so she was very concerned about her getting polio. Hallelujah, when the vaccination came out and we could be protected. That was glorious. And to think that we had a vaccine that could protect everyone and that it was turned against us. So this is the one that I wanted to read, and it's in August 30th. My Country Calls. I hear it in the pleading eyes of children caged. I hear it in George Floyd's last breath. I hear it in Lady Liberty's tears, ringing breathless in my ears. Vote, vote, vote. And that's by Mary Harrell. And I'll end with one thing that Mary Susan made me think about and reflect on, is that we would not have developed and passed the resolution to create the Diversity and Inclusive Commission that we have now. The reason it passed was because the media was focused on the folks who were serving us, and a lot of them were Black and brown people. And so that was kind of topical, and we wanted to respond, of course, to George Floyd's situation with his murder. But I am convinced, in fact, as the former city manager said, we never would have passed that the next year. And so we are a city that benefited, if you think about that, because we definitely needed the commission, and we are the only one that has such a thing, and it is marvelous, and I encourage you to follow it. So that's my context of where the Yearning to Breathe has led me and will continue to inspire me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You all can come on up. We are going to now get into our readings. And first of all, I want to remind everybody to silence your cell phones. And then take a deep breath and listen to these readings. We ask that you not applaud after each one. If the readers will be coming up in groups, and while they're moving, if you're moved to applaud or whatever, that's fine. But we're not going to break up the process of reading and focus on any one reading, but it is the total experience. And in our book, we had many, many contributors, and we also included pieces from other publications, from other times and other locations to give a perspective on what we were all writing about here and in the area. And you'll hear some of that variety of readings today. So we are ready to begin, and welcome the first group of readers.
Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. I should say that I guess I am a streetwalker of sorts. I do walk a lot in Benicia, and I was struck very early in the shutdown by how different the streets felt. They were quieter, there weren't as many people around, and there weren't even as many cars, and it was just an eerie feeling. So that's what brought me to write Streets I Have Never Walked Before. Silent now, familiar but still. The sound of a human voice alerts me. Where is it? Where are they? Am I safe? The patter of 1,000 voices, footfalls, halted. By something we can't see, science fiction. Across the street, a mute baseball field. No cracking bats, no one on base, no runs, no outs. Nothing. The craving for normalcy growls like an empty stomach.
Friday, April 24th, 2020. For me, COVID was destabilizing in a lot of different ways, social, politically, through my job, and really personally. And, it really made me kind of reflect on how I'd been living life at the moment, how I wanted to live life in the future, and kind of what I was sacrificing, and what the impacts of those things were. If a year ago you would have asked me what I can live without, there's no doubt that I would confidently, boldly, almost in a shout, declared, I don't know. I mean, certainly between the inevitable ebb and flow of life and the close but not quite living the dream of a career, house, kids, and wife, I've accepted that I have to spend 8 to 9 hours a day with people who, if I was fired or retired, would likely not find me to see or say, hey, in exchange for the 3 to 4 hours with the 2 little people I'd cease my life or yours for before the ink dries on this pad. The letters in DAD often feel like an acronym for dogged and distant. To feed, clothe, and shelter them takes a level of persistence paired with the palpable and precise insistence on denying the impact that my absence has inflicted. Pre-pandemic, you couldn't have told me that I wasn't super present. But since having a shelter in place, I've noticed that my place of shelter is more helter-skelter than I'd like to admit. If I take a step back a bit, COVID-19 has exposed that, at least a few years prior to 2019, aspects of my life were gasping for air. It took the longest year of my life to demonstrate just how much I was longing for one different than the one I had constructed. How can I return to the office suite denying myself the sweet faces of my children riding scooters or running in the park midday, not losing hours of my life commuting on the freeway? I can live without the rat race, without the digitization of my mother and grandfather's face, without the absence of a warm embrace, or if I'm completely honest, a cold one. A loud, annoying fight with the in-person chance to make it all right. I could live without living without all the things that pre-pandemic I was living without. That mental, physical, and emotional drought. So I suppose the real question is, what can I and what am I willing to live with? The COVID death total on this date was 54,824.
I wrote this poem upon reflecting the things that I had done the year before with such ease. Quarantine dreams. I'm in a crowd watching a parade. I'm in a hotel where I've previously stayed. I'm bottlenecked at the entrance to the county fair. People everywhere, breathing the same air. A passing stranger elbows me and doesn't give an apology. My everyday life of the past, every night in my dreams is cast. Perhaps a forecast of things to come. Perhaps those times are forever done. By the sun, I shrug through my quarantine routines. By the moon, I slip into my quarantine dreams. The U.S. death toll as of today, 97,249. I'm up here to read a poem by somebody, or a piece that's by somebody that can't be here today. This is Friday, May 22nd, 2020. I happen to know the author of this piece, and I'll just briefly say that she is one of the most positive thinking people I know. And for that person to write that piece, this piece, is striking to me, because you will see that it's kind of overwhelmingly low. And in fact, the title is "The Tide is Low." When I ventured out today, it was a gray and overcast afternoon, the direct opposite of the sunshine of yesterday. I thought to myself, every day feels so different in this season of governmental mandates, unanticipated shortages, and shelter-in-place orders. I expected empty streets, sidewalks, parks, signs banning parking in places where people used to gather, by the waterfront and such. But what I see and feel goes deep as I walk. Heading into the promenade, I notice that the tide is out quite far. Having taken so many pictures of the Red Baron, a town landmark, in different lighting conditions, it doesn't fully register that the front end of the boat is nearly aground. Rather, my eyes are riveted on the churning ridges of white caused by ragged currents just past the waterline. The swirling curves draw me into them. By the time I get to the pier, an uncomfortable heaviness is creeping into my bones. It's far too dark for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I pass through an opening in the walkway by a bold "parking lot closed during the pandemic" sign and yellow police tape cordoning off the parking lot. Suddenly, I am lost. No one in sight in any direction. Hurrying to the end of the pier, I scan the shoreline like a seagull gliding overhead, looking for some juicy morsel, some hope. I see things I never noticed before. Too much black mud, dead plants, sticks and rocks covered by sludge in the vast gap between shore and water. I sit down on a bench and my head drops into my waiting hands. I can't help thinking that even the water is afraid to come close. Is it practicing safe distancing? It seems confused and leery of the shore, maybe of me. Today, the tide is lower than I have ever seen it. I am paralyzed by the desolation. I wonder if the tide can go any lower. Today's death toll in the U.S., 99,673.
Sunday, June 7th, 2020. George Floyd was murdered on May 20th. And for many of us in this country, we thought more deeply, more passionately, more intensely about all of the issues in our sad racial heritage of injustice and of the power of life and death. The poem I wrote for June 7th is called White Privilege. It comes to us white people before we are born, like an unsolicited credit card that somehow we can't revoke. No matter whether we have been granted the full credit line limit, no matter whether we have worked to dislodge the stone of bigotry and melt the ice of indifference, overlapping systems of oppression give us an edge in surviving COVID-19, in surviving, period. Free from the stalking terror of 401 years of ingrained, swaggering impunity that screams with brandished weapons and whispers in the awful intimacy of a chokehold or the nonchalance of a knee bearing down on a neck. Only white lives matter. Time for white folks to drop the limp, rancid veil of unholy innocence and go all human. Today, the death toll in the United States from COVID-19 stood at 113,888.
I was asked to read this poem by Carolyn Randall Williams, and when Mary Susan asked, of course I read it over, and I will admit that I was taken aback but this poem does indeed speak to a lot of who I am, meaning myself and those in my family. Friday, July 3rd, 2020. Title: You want a Confederate monument? My body is a Confederate monument. I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. I am a black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. The death toll as of this date, 130,071.
Sunday, August 16th, 2020. This poem is a praise poem. It was written in the summer of 2020. I woke up in the early hours before dawn, and the poem came to me quickly, easily, as if it wanted to be here. It came in the darkness and stayed. The poem is titled Light, Hope, and Love. Praise the light that comes early after the stars go out, before the first bird wakes and sings its joy to the setting moon. Praise the glimmer of hope we dream before dawn, when night casts its shadow along buildings and empty streets, in dark rooms where loneliness embraces those who cannot sleep. Praise love. It is the song that stays late, the candle that burns after the light is gone. As of today, 170,662 total U.S. deaths from COVID-19.
So into the chaos of COVID and racial injustice came wildfire. In mid-August 2020, wildfires ignited across Northern California due to a siege of dry lightning from rare massive thunderstorms. These fires burned between over 2 million acres within a 3-week period and included enormous nearby wildfires. The SCU Lightning Complex, the August Complex, you remember these names? The LNU Lightning Complex. All 3 of these historic fires were burning when I wrote this poem on a smoky day in Benicia, August 26, 2020. The ghosts of you. The ghosts of your existence, anonymous, spectral, never known, arrive hot and deadly in a silent fog and surround me, invade my world, and trap me here in my air-conditioned home. The particulate remnants of your home, the smoldering bits of your walls, the white bits of you that gather on my car and enter my aging lungs, surround me whole. These ghostly hints of your loss come filter my thoughts and possess me and haunt what's left of everyday pursuits. Yet we live with your ghosts. Your loss is ours in miniature, but lethal nonetheless. A floating threat to body and soul, invasive in and out. Sadly, your massive loss is now a mind-numbing, choking, ghostly surround. Meanwhile, COVID infections continued spreading just like those wildfires. Total U.S. deaths from COVID-19 on August 26th, 180,288.
Friday, September 11th, 2020. I wrote this poem during the 2020 California wildfire season. By mid-August, California was fighting 367 known wildfires, many of which had been sparked by lightning storms. The lightning complex fire was tearing through the wine country at this time, and the Bay Area was engulfed in smoke. The air quality was hazardous and extremely unhealthy. I titled this poem, Nectar. Late August morning, my once vibrant garden cries out in distress, cries out for water, love, and attention. Sun-starved and smoke-drenched from wildfires, everything's wilting in the toxic, unbreathable air. I emerge from the sliding glass door wearing a large N95 mask, dark sunglasses, and my wide-brimmed purple sun hat, looking like a giant Kafkaesque insect. A brave hummingbird zips toward the bird feeder, but then stops and hovers near me, studying me, deciding if it is safe to sip nectar with me so close by. I smile behind my mask, amused that the lovely iridescent winged bird does not recognize me. I want to say, hey, I'm not a cockroach. I'm that two-legged creature who nurtures the garden and refills the nectar in your bird feeder. But even my purple hat looks dusky today with all that smoke. And the bird darts to the plum tree and lights on a high branch to wait for this giant cockroach to leave. Today's total U.S. deaths from COVID-19, 193,587.
September 13th, 2020. Just a few words. As is typical of Mary Susan, she has not credited herself when she credited everyone else. Thank you. I think poetry has bound us together, and it's because of you. Thank you. I wrote this poem, and you'll see what it's about. One of the things we do know out of having COVID-19 is that it speaks of being homeless in our own homes, of being isolated. And none of us will ever forget how terrible it is to be isolated and lonely in our homes. We still have homelessness with us in many ways. Compassion survives. A destitute man crouched under the causeway, connecting the drugstore and Safeway. He'd squeezed his emaciated frame between the watermelon and cantaloupe bins. The causeway provided a shield from the blistering sun, but no relief from the 90-degree heat. He wore ragged jeans, dilapidated shoes, a faded T-shirt rife with holes. "Hi there," I began. "Can I get you something to eat?" "Okay," he stuttered. Once inside, I purchased a sandwich, a soda, and a bottle of hand sanitizer. But when I returned, he'd left. So I deposited the items where he'd been sitting. I went to Safeway more often than usual over the next week. When he was there, it was the same as before. So I'd just wave and head into the store. One day he nodded at me as I went by and didn't glance furtively behind me as he did so. At last, I thought, and repeated what had now become the mantra. If you've left already when I come out, I'll just leave some things here. A few days after that, he waved at me as I was returning to my car. I caught just the hint of a smile from him. He'll never know that with that simple grin, he'd given me more than I ever could give him. The death toll as of September 13th, 194,738.
Friday, September 25, 2020. I wrote this poem because on the night of August 16, 2020, I awoke because of flashes outside my window, and I sat at the window for the next 3 hours and saw the most spectacular lightning storm I think I'd ever seen. Spellbound, marveling at nature and the beauty of it. What I didn't know was what Roger touched on, that in those 3 hours, 2,500 lightning strikes hit Northern California, sparking 585 fires. The poem is spellbound. In that darkest hour before daybreak, we watched from the upstairs window jagged lightning bolts lacerating violet sky, illuminating frozen tableau of Carquinez Bridge, Crockett Hills, in flickering strobe flashes. Petulant Zeus was taking aim, plucking iridescent arrows from his quiver and hurling them to earth with a muscular heave. Craggy slashes searing the August night. We gaped, blowing soft ohs. As the thunder rolled away, we slumbered, raindrops tapping at the edges of our dreams. Beyond the hovering black-chinned hummingbird, a stagnant gray miasma hangs, charred DNA of yesterday's normal, doors and windows sealed against its leaden stench. Airborne strikes, boots on the ground, puny weapons against the insatiable dragon. Red sun rising, sorrowful eyes seek the phoenix. From our safe perch, we watched the ghastly spectacle detonate, spellbound.
As I read my last poem today, I do want to just pay homage to Mary Susan. And I thank her for allowing us to keep the mic in pandemic. I mean it. That was good, but I do mean it. This poem was penned on October 7th, but I need to preface it by saying what happened October 6th. I went to bed that night absolutely frustrated with the entirety of the year 2020. I was frustrated, angry, sad, asthmatic, couldn't breathe, fire, ash. I was sad. Racial injustice, economic downturns, it was just too much. And I got up that day and I was wondering what was happening because the atmosphere had changed. I went outside and the sun that I used to recognize was unrecognizable. It was red, it was eerie, and I did not know what was happening. It was very sad. Again, asthmatic, frustrated, angry, could not be consoled. October 6th. When I got up and saw that, I penned the poem. So Wednesday, October 7th, 2020. I won't be bogged down in the reasons why. For when I looked up in today's sky, I saw the sun. And it was one in vermilion again.
Leilani. Yesterday, the smoky air cleared. I visited my 7th great-grandchild for the first time, wearing a mask. Gathering safely in the lush garden of ripe peaches, figs, squashes, pumpkins, and tomatoes, as mornix and hummingbirds flitted among the flowers. Seated, I held her mellow and beautiful being in my arms and said her name, Leilani, aloud. Sweet Leilani, heavenly flower, I sang to her, but could not catch her infant smell through the mask. Peering into her face, searching for resemblances, I saw different elusive family members race by in her random expressions. She fit so snugly against my body, as if she'd always been there. Though only 18 days old, she always had. When her mother spoke, she turned towards her. Soon was nursing contentedly in her tender embrace, falling peacefully asleep. I left with a bag of sweet, ripe peaches, my heart full, the word resilient on my mind. Resilient. Thank you.
On that same day, Wednesday, October 14th, a second poem appeared. There were many testimonial poems in this collection, from John Lewis to friends of friends. Many people recalled because we could not get together to mourn. So on the day when we welcomed Leilani on that page, we also had an homage to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who had died on September 18th. And it was all just beginning to settle in, the implications. She held back the storm alone, and we knew she was a hero, but we didn't know how lonely it would feel standing here without her. She didn't get upset about it, just did what she needed to do, pretending when she had to, because her goal was freedom. That's all that mattered. Not being tied down to some man's idea of a life, winning justice, undoing the chains. And now they can't wait to put her memory in the ground. Now that she can no longer face them down with her steely eyes, her strength that finally failed her, she knew they were waiting, even if we didn't. And as of that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 numbered 217,895.
Journal date, October 21st, 2020. Intro. A few words of a kind. Poetry, there are many kinds of poetry, and poetry is often encaptured in the service of others, enraptured for the times, out of necessity and great urgency. The poem, standing on its own, asks, who am I, and what is my purpose? The poem for that day and this day. The days. It's a thought like in the 20s. Backwards was not an option until it became an option. Quite suddenly, this time had been changed forever. It is an opportunity to build a new option. Best to take the opportunity rather than have to be left at the station, watching ourselves go by. Probably less drinking, probably less driving would best prepare us physically and mentally. As we rush into this new age, the future is now. Don't let it pass us by, please. As of today, there were 223,532 total U.S. deaths from COVID-19.
Journal entry, October 28th, 2020. September 2020 brought scorching wildfires, burnt orange skies, and the shocking death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, aka the notorious RBG. While the nation mourned, the GOP wasted no time in stealing yet another nomination to secure a partisan majority on the court. The sorrow was palpable. In October, lies and misinformation fell like toxic rain from the atmosphere of Republican rhetoric. Doubt and fear, hate and division were dark clouds in the brooding sky as COVID deaths continued to rise. 6 months had passed since I lost my mother, herself named Ruth, so my grief was still raw and my heart was still reeling. My poem, Late October Wind, was written after an October storm that seemed to be the physical manifestation of the emotional whirlwind that swirled around the 2020 presidential election. Late October Wind. It's rattling my bones, the late October wind, battering the roses, shivering my skin, twisting the hibiscus, howling through the doors, moaning through the windows amidst this pandemic pre-election storm, threatening our democracy, dismantling sacred norms, abandoning facts and integrity in eerie, foreboding tones. As of today, 229,357 total U.S. deaths from COVID-19.
Sunday, November 1st, 2020. On February 11th, 2021, I lost my husband of 55 years to COVID. We, the people. The sting of indifference shall straddle the land until we, the people, compose songs of commitment. When sacred lyrics splatter the ground like falling rain, the colors of the ripened corn shall bring truth, justice, and safe journey to the people. Hang on to hope. Stay balanced in tradition. Gather holy water from sacred wells. Rejoice. Marvel the heavenly wonders. Sing the sacred songs. Total U.S. deaths from COVID-19. 232,836.
We've done these readings on Zoom. First live one today. And I'm always fighting back tears by the end of it. Thank you. Thank you to all the readers. And let's all give a round of applause for all those who have contributed to this. It's nothing any of us could have done alone.